It's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. In the 70s and 80s, almost 5,000 patients were infected with HIV and hepatitis C after being given drugs made from contaminated blood products. As work finally begins on a public inquiry into what went wrong, we speak to those most affected.
The uncertainty of what it would mean, i.e. death, what it would mean in terms of being toxic to other people.
If you were one of those treated with the tainted blood, let us know your story this morning. A public inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal takes a major step forward this week as the inquiry chair, Sir Brian Langstaff, starts work. Back in the 70s and 80s, thousands of NHS patients were treated with blood products from abroad that were infected with HIV and hepatitis C. And more than half of them, 2,400 people, have so far died as a result. Many of those affected and their families say they weren't told of the risks involved and there was a cover-up. Our reporter Jim Reid has been following this story for the last year.
It was completely avoidable and it should not have happened to my father at all. He did not need that treatment. It was not life-threatening.
I'd like them to never enjoy a night's sleep ever again for what they did.
In the corner of a small church in London, a reminder of a little-known tragedy. 40 years ago, a whole generation was given drugs meant to improve their lives. Almost all were infected with a blood virus, many with HIV.
What stigma do they attach to the haemophiliac community? Why do they think they can treat us as second-class citizens?
Now, as a full public inquiry into the scandal starts work, maybe, finally, the chance of some answers.
The truth will come out, and this is what we need. We need closure. We need to be able to put this to bed.
When I'm cycling, I don't think about being a haemophiliac. I don't think, oh, I can't do that because I'm going to crash. I just get on with it, and if it happens, then I'll deal with it. I just take risks with it.
Georgia Young tearing round the track in Glasgow. The risk she's talking about is because at birth she was diagnosed with haemophilia.
Haemophilia is a blood disorder, so it doesn't let my blood clot, so I take 5 times longer than the average person to stop bleeding. So instead of having a 10-minute nosebleed, I would have a 4-hour nosebleed.
Haemophilia is genetic and very rare in girls. A century ago, few lived beyond childhood. A small injury could mean dramatic blood loss. Today, it can be managed. Modern synthetic drugs simply replace the clotting agent missing from the blood.
It's really easy to live with it. I barely notice it in my life, to be honest. They shouldn't really treat me differently just because I've got a blood disorder. So just treat me like a normal person.
This, though, isn't about Georgie, but an earlier generation slowly poisoned by those promising new drugs. One product was mainly to blame, freeze-dried blood plasma, or Factor VIII. Now made from chemicals, back then it came from the blood of tens of thousands of donors. The NHS couldn't keep up with demand, so it bought in bulk from the United States. There, much of it came from groups with a high risk of blood disease, like prisoners serving time.
We're going to Ramsgate in a minute.
Actually, we'll go past where we were.
Every 3 months, Steve Dymond and his wife Sue make the 3-hour trip to King's College Hospital in South London.
I'm looking essentially at the rest of my life with uncertain health, with the expectation that you hope for the least worst.
Steve can't be sure how he fell ill. As a mild haemophiliac, he really didn't need the factor VIII that later proved so dangerous. He was given it anyway, many times without warning.
Didn't explain to me that it wasn't heat treated. Didn't explain to me that there was a risk of contamination. It's probably the same for every haemophiliac of my generation. They were exposed time after time after time after time.
In late 1984, Steve was told he may have been infected with HIV. Back then, the test to find out took 18 months.
Parents have been told that the boy affected doesn't have the disease and that
In the mid-80s, there was a huge stigma around AIDS. Parents in Hampshire started pulling their children out of school after one haemophiliac in class tested positive for HIV.
Both children developed the antibodies after receiving a contaminated blood clotting agent.
It was very, very dark. It was the heart of darkness, really. The uncertainty of what it would mean, i.e. death, what it would mean in terms of being toxic to other people.
I actually went through the insane thought of actually wanting to be infected if he was, so that he couldn't shut me out. But yes, that was 18 months to find out whether life was over.
Steve did eventually test negative for HIV. He was, though, infected with another serious disease caused by the treatment. At the time, the couple were trying to have children.
He said, that's why you've got hepatitis C. Virtually every haemophiliac of your age range has been contaminated with factor VIII concentrate. I've got hepatitis C. And it was just banal.
But in terms of family life, within 48 hours we had a letter from the consultant saying they could no longer keep us on the programme and they were terminating the IVF.
So it stopped you having children?
So it was the end of having children, yes.
Treated. There's no evidence of any viable cancer there. But secondly, to get a bit...
Steve now gets state-of-the-art care here at one of the top liver units in the country.
I think you're making a
New drugs have cleared the virus from his body, but living for 3 decades with hepatitis C comes at a cost.
The chance of being alive 1 year after a transplant...
One tumour has already been removed from Steve's liver. If and when another is found, he'll most likely need a transplant.
These are terms we're not...
It's not the same life as I'd imagined, in terms of dreams, in terms of ambition, in terms of accomplishment. It's become a life of sickness, illness, worry, anxiety. When I talk about Sue, I talk about her as my widow in waiting.
Nearly 5,000 haemophiliacs, almost everyone in the country, were infected in this way. In the UK, there have been 2 limited investigations into the scandal. Last year, after a long campaign by survivors and their families, the government said there will, finally, be a full public inquiry.
The victims and their families have suffered pain and hardship, and they deserve answers, and the inquiry that I've announced today will give them those answers.
I want to try and understand how so many warnings from as early as the 1950s were ignored. How any government can put a small, vulnerable part of their community at such a severe risk, and who was responsible. And for those responsible, I'd like them to never enjoy a night's sleep ever again for what they did.
The widow of a haemophiliac who was HIV positive has been granted legal...
It wasn't just haemophiliacs at risk. Contaminated blood was also used for transfusions in hospitals. Another 35,000 people are thought to have been infected in this way.
The political issue is why the government hasn't acted faster to achieve self-sufficiency in its own British-based stocks of factor VIII.
The warnings were there. In 1983, the Department of Health was told to withdraw the suspected American blood products. The public inquiry will want to know why that warning was apparently ignored.
Yeah, this is outside Jeremy Hunt's surgery in Surrey that said, "I and my family trusted you, please don't betray us. Mike Doricott, rest in peace."
For family members, this is now the last best chance of getting some answers.
But
Sarah Doricott's father Mike died 3 years ago of liver cancer caused by the hepatitis C he contracted. After his terminal diagnosis, he met with his local MP, who happens to be the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt.
you know, he made lots of promises to my dad that he was going to sort everything out for him and he didn't have to worry about what was going to happen to his family. As far as I'm concerned, the promises Jeremy Hunt made, he's not fulfilled them.
Like many haemophiliacs, Mike Doricott didn't realise he was ill until decades after he was given factor VIII. He blamed the infection on routine dental surgery as a teenager.
It was completely avoidable and it should not have happened to my father at all. He was mild haemophiliac. He did not need that treatment. It was not life-threatening. It was routine dental surgery. It's just, I can't even fathom how angry it makes us. One of the strongest memories I have of being told that he was ill was he turned the lights off in the living room because he didn't want anyone to see him cry. And he told us that he was dying or that he could die. And I can't even, it's just such a powerful memory that I can't seem to get out of my head, is your own father telling you that he's going to die.
Mike Doricott received 2 liver transplants to extend his life. He worked as a campaigner for many years, fighting for that public inquiry, which has now been granted after his death at the age of just 47.
My friends and my mum and, you know, campaigners had rung me to say that we're getting a public inquiry, and I just broke down. It's something that he was working so hard towards before he passed away. You know, I took the reins from him, and I really wanted to be able to do that as well, and to be able to say, I've done you proud, Dad, and we've finally got the answers that we were looking for. You know, what happened, we found out who was to blame, and we've finally got some justice.
A judge starts work as chair of that public inquiry this week. There is no guarantee, of course, that it can answer the questions of the families affected. But it might be the best hope yet of finding out how and why a disaster of this scale happened in the first place.
A public inquiry into the appalling injustice of the contaminated blood scandal takes a major step forward this week. Sir Brian Langstaff starts work as chair of the UK-wide inquiry. Back in the 70s and 80s, thousands of NHS patients were treated with blood products from abroad that were infected with HIV and hepatitis C. And more than half of them, 2,400 people, have so far died as a result. Many of those affected and their families believe they were not told of the risks involved, and they believe there was a cover-up. The Prime Minister announced last summer that there would be an inquiry because they deserve answers. Our reporter Jim Reid has been following this story for the last year.
In the corner of a small church in London, a reminder of a little-known tragedy. 40 years ago, a whole generation of haemophiliacs were given drugs meant to improve their lives. Almost all were infected with HIV or hepatitis C.
We're going to Ramsgate in a minute.
Every 3 months, Steve Dymond and his wife Sue make the long trip to King's College Hospital in South London.
I'm looking essentially at the rest of my life with uncertain health.
As a haemophiliac, Steve's blood lacks enough of the key material needed to make it clot properly. In the 70s and 80s, the solution was this: free-dried blood plasma, or factor VIII. Back then, it came from the unscreened blood of thousands of donors.
How many times I was contaminated with hepatitis C or hepatitis B, I don't know. I can't tell you. It didn't explain to me that there was a risk of contamination.
There's no evidence of any viable cancer.
Steve now gets state-of-the-art care here at one of the top liver units in the country.
I think you're making a
New drugs have cleared the hepatitis C from his body, but living for 3 decades with the virus comes at a cost.
The chance of being alive 1 year.
One tumour has already been removed from Steve's liver. If and when another is found, he'll most likely need a transplant.
It's become a life of sickness, illness, worry, anxiety. When I talk about Sue, I talk about her as my widow in waiting.
Nearly 5,000 haemophiliacs were infected with hepatitis C or HIV. Many other NHS patients were infected directly through blood transfusions. Last year, after a long campaign by survivors and their families, the government said there will finally be a full public inquiry.
The victims and their families deserve answers, and the inquiry that I've announced today will give them those answers.
Yeah, this is outside Jeremy Hunt's surgery in Surrey. That said,
Sarah Dorricott's father Mike died 3 years ago of liver cancer caused by the hepatitis C he contracted.
It was completely avoidable, and it should not have happened to my father at all. He was mild haemophiliac. He did not need that treatment.
Mike Dorricott received 2 liver transplants to extend his life. He worked as a campaigner for many years, fighting for that public inquiry that has now been granted after his death.
It's something that he was working so hard towards. You know, I took the reins from him, and I really wanted to be able to do that as well, and to be able to say, I've done you proud, Dad, and we've finally got the answers that we were looking for.
A judge starts work as chair of that public inquiry this week. There is no guarantee it can answer all the questions of the families affected, but it might be the last real hope of finding out why this disaster happened in the first place.
Well, a government spokesperson said the infected blood scandal of the 70s and 80s should never have happened. This government is committed to making sure all those that have suffered so terribly can get the answers they have spent so long waiting for, and ensure that a tragedy of this scale can never happen again. Let's introduce you to Andy Evans. He's with us. He's chairman of Tainted Blood. He's a haemophiliac, and he was infected with HIV as a child. Sue Threakall is here. Her husband Bob died in 1991, aged 47, after being infected with HIV, hepatitis B and C. And Diana Johnson is here, a Labour MP who's been campaigning for a public inquiry since 2010. Andy, welcome back to our programme. Just remind our audience, for those who want to learn more and may have missed you last time you were with us, what happened to you as a boy?
I was diagnosed with having haemophilia A severe when I was 11 months old, and the treatments were just changing at that point from a relatively safe treatment, as we know now, called cryoprecipitate, to freeze-dried plasma products. And we know that, that they were carrying infections, and unfortunately I was infected with hepatitis B, C and HIV at the age of 5. I later went on to contract full-blown AIDS at the age of 16 and barely survived until my 20s when new combination therapies were brought out.
Wow, when you put it like that, I mean, goodness me, how would you say this has affected your life?
This has defined my life in almost every way. There's not been part of it that hasn't been almost designed by illness and the battle for justice as well. And of course the anxieties and the worries of both myself and those people around me who've had to suffer alongside me, including my parents and my siblings. But also through campaigning and meeting the wonderful people that I've managed to meet through this, who have all in their own way suffered so greatly. Many of course have lost their relatives, but have given me, including Sue, including our secretary Sue, yes. Yeah. You know, people have been taken away far too young, and I just thank my lucky stars that I wasn't one of them.
Sue, is it possible to describe the impact of losing your husband, aged 47, on you and your family?
Well, I think it's fair to say it completely destroyed our family. Some people pull closer together at times like that, other people go the opposite way. He was very, very frightened right up until the end, but because we were never actually told that he was terminally ill, the whole thing came as such a dreadful shock. I mean, it's almost like a physical shock, you know. it was very, very hard to deal with. He was, as she said, only 47, got 3 children, 1 of our own and 2 from a previous marriage. They, like me, had no idea that he was so close to the end. We thought he'd just gone into hospital for, you know, minor procedures, and he was dead within 3 days.
What answers do you both want from this inquiry? I think you've met the chairman as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I've met Sir Brian Langstaff on 2 occasions now. I think if we get the terms of reference of this inquiry correct, I think Sir Brian Langstaff is a good man, and I think he will. I mean, the hopes of thousands of people rest on this inquiry. We feel that this is our last-ditch attempt to get any kind of justice. I think if anybody can do it, it's Sir Brian, from what I've seen of him so far. We would like, I think, first and foremost, vindication for all of the years that we've spent banging on about this. We want to know that we were right, and we feel that we are right. I came into campaigning quite early on, and very soon after the evidence started building up, I thought to myself, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And this really does deserve proper and thorough investigation. But of course, as campaigners, we've had to do that piecemeal by ourselves over the years, with illness and death in the families. And now we get the chance to sit down before a judge, tell him our stories, and get the answers once and for all. I think that will mean so much to so many people.
You've been campaigning for this since 2010, since the constituent came to you to tell you their story. What do you want to discover from this inquiry?
Well, I want to find out what happened, clearly, but I also think the inquiry needs to look very carefully at the cover-up that's happened ever since the fact that... sorry to interrupt, Diana Johnson, but the Department of Health was warned in the early 80s about this blood. Yes, I think there is evidence that the decisions that were taken at the time were flawed because there was information that should have been taken into account. But what I'm interested in really is why these people have had to campaign for so long to get to this point. And it seems to me when you look around the world, you look at Canada, you look at France, you look at Ireland, action has been taken. People have been brought to account. People have been charged and convicted and have gone to prison for this. So I want to know why in this country we have failed this group of people so badly for so long.
Ultimately, what do you want, Sue?
Ultimately, I would like the truth to come out, but I don't want to see it rushed. We know it's going to take some time to do properly. Like Andy, I have faith in the inquiry team and in the chair. But if you imagine a huge jigsaw puzzle being thrown up into the air and hurled around the room, some pieces are going to land face up, some will land face down. And that's the situation we've got, and they've got to painstakingly turn them all over, do what we do with a jigsaw puzzle, sort them into groups and try and resurrect it to get to the truth.
It's been a huge amount of time since this all happened, and of course many of the people that were involved originally are not going to be around.
No, but since the inquiry was announced last July, 70 people have died.
And more now, yes.
Is it?
Yes. Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously time is of the essence, but as Sue says, we need a thorough job on this. This is very much the last bite of the cherry that the campaigners have got. And if this goes the way of previous inquiries, such as the whitewash that was the Penrose inquiry and the Archer, although
those are the two previous limited inquiries, weren't they?
Yeah, although it was a great inquiry and led by Lord Archer, who is a fine man, it had no teeth. It wasn't a statutory inquiry. It couldn't subpoena documents or get witnesses on the stand. So we're hoping for much, much more from this inquiry.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens. Finally, work starts on it this week. Thank you so much again. Thank you for coming on the programme again.
You.
Andy Evans, Chairman of Tainted Blood, Sue Threakall, who's Secretary of the organisation and whose husband, Bob, died in 1991, aged 47, and Diana Johnson, a Labour MP, who's been campaigning for this public inquiry since 2010. Thank you all very much. Thank you.